What's going on, people? Apologies for not being very active on here. I'm going to try and start posting more often on YouTube. And I was thinking a good way to do that is just a little vlog style update. So here's something I've been working on recently. This is the pond in the big vivarium, and I scrapped the old setup because I wanted to try something different. Now, I built this structure here in order to create a bit more of a natural look waterfall. And as you can see, I've got little taps up in there, so I can adjust the flow of that. Now, the way this pond is currently working is I have two containers. So as you can see down here, there is a container in a container which makes a little bit of a trench along the side, which I've filled up with gravel. Now that is to act as a planter. So you can see here, I've got a couple of plants in here. And the idea being that the plants will help filter the water and bring more life to the setup. Now, I went with a dirted bottom. For those of you that don't know what that means, look up dirted fish tank. And it's basically you put a substrate layer, bury it in sand and gravel, and that allows you to then plant in the bottom without adding any artificial nutrients. The pump is back here, shielded by filter foam, and that's housed in a little plastic cage to try and keep as much of the dirt out of that as possible. That then runs up here. Now this is the least pretty of it all because I'm still working on this section, but basically the water comes down there, pumps into the bottom of this container, which is full of gravel and sand, and that acts as what's referred to as a wetland or bog filter. Filters up through that substrate, then overflows down through these. Now I'm going to hide these better as time goes on. And then it comes back down, and as you can see with the clarity of the water, when I first did this water was basically mud. It was a little bit concerning, and I have done a water change. Not a full water change, just about a 50%, just to clear it up a bit of any debris and any of the floating organics. But all in all, I think it's looking pretty damn good. This section up here, I am going to hide a lot of this much better. My plan is to use this as another planting section, so I would like to fill this up with maybe some ferns, some floating plants, some aquatic plants, and that again, the plants will help filter the water, and it's also going to hide this ugly box. Now I could do artificial rock work around that to hide it more, but I have some plans for the future and I don't want to go too far in depth, but eventually I want to upgrade this system, and it's going to have a pretty significant section for a pond that will be built into the enclosure itself. So that's something to look forward to in the future, but I need more space to do that, so that won't be in my current location. That will be something to look forward to. So let's talk a little bit about the plants I've got in here. This plant here, planted down in the trench. Again, this will all be hidden. I'm hoping that this here, let's start with this one actually. This is club moss. Now, I've got this in my most recent setup, which if you haven't seen that video, go and check out my last video. And that's growing really, really well. Now I want to see if it'll grow in water. So we've planted in here. If that grows well, that should hide all of this lip here. And these are really cheap and affordable just from Bunnings. This one here, this is a green dragon pothos. Now planted down in there. I've been growing this plant in water for probably 6 months, and it is absolutely enormous, as you can see there. So my hope for this, I'm not sure if I'm happy with that positioning exactly, but I would like this to sort of create a bit more vinage that looks alive. So I'm sure I'll tweak that as time goes on, and we'll see how it goes in here in a nice humid warm environment, because it's just been growing in running water in a not very well lit room, and it's absolutely thriving. So hopefully it likes this environment as well. We've got some more club moss here. This is probably how, again, if this survives, I will be going about hiding those taps. This plant here, I'm not actually sure what this is. This is some kind of a yucca, I believe, and I just found that growing in the garden, and it had sprouted up a new plant, which is what you're looking at now. The original plant was humongous, so hopefully if this grows in here, we'll have a nice big plant with some really nice foliage. And it's a really hardy plant from what I could see of the mother plant. So looking forward to seeing if that survives. Fingers crossed it does. Down here you can see our little creek bed, some of our artificial grasses. I've considered growing some like fescue grasses and stuff down here, but as I've mentioned in the past, the lighting down the bottom is not that good. So I need plants that don't require too much light. These big guys up here are doing fantastic, although they are starting to lean across as they grow. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but we'll keep an eye on that. This bad boy is coming from all the way over there. Now that doesn't look that far, but that is about 5 foot of tendril right there. So we're wrapping that around the vines, hopefully to create a bit more of a natural look. Added some more artificial ferns up here because the big guy has been sitting on them and squashing them flat. So hopefully with this system here, we can get a bit more life in. I'm thinking some ferns and stuff should go quite well back in there. But if anyone has any suggestions on aquatic plants that don't require too much light, I'm open to suggestions. Back here, you're probably wondering what these are. Now, this one here is a port for a fogging system that I'm working on that is plumbed across the back of this enclosure. And this one here is the old port for the previous power leads and whatnot. So I need to fill that up with expanding foam and cover that. We'll do another update video on the fogging system, but it looks really cool as fog pours across and trickles down into this section here. So you've got that to look forward to in the future as well. Across the Lilith's enclosure, the umbrella trees are surviving. They're doing quite well, haven't dropped any leaves. And there she is up in that top corner. So this setup's chugging along really, really well. A few spider webs. This is something that I don't see many people do, and I'm not really sure why. But I actually like to leave any spiders in there, as long as they're not anything that I know is excessively dangerous. They keep down the bugs, they keep down the little gnats and little flying bugs that get in there, and they work really, really well for that purpose. So I don't worry about that. Some people seem to stress about it. You can see back here there's a massive spider web. And I have never even seen the spider, so he's very unintrusive, keeps to himself. And the spider webs just create a more natural look in all, really. I mean, spiders are a part of nature. I need to do a better job of hiding these pots, but I mean, she's due for an upgrade soon, so might just chuck some moss on top of that and call it a day, really. Over at Odin's enclosure, and as you can see, this thing is growing in phenomenally, which is pretty crazy considering these lights that I've got in here are little cheapy panels off of, I believe I got them on Temu. Very inexpensive, and like, check out that growth. That's phenomenal. The club moss is doing well. Even this little vine here, now this was a weed that I pulled out of the garden and I thought that it looked quite good, and I just chucked it in here, and honestly it died off to the point that I pulled most of it out and I must have missed a bit, and all of a sudden all these little tendrils are growing up, and this thing's growing fast. So I'm excited for that to add to the appearance of the viney, sort of jungly look that we've got going here. The piper plant at the back, doing quite well. It's dropped a couple of leaves, but considering it's pretty much directly under the heat light, like, it is set back a bit, but it seems to be surviving quite well. Something I did is I channeled this rock here, and that's got a slope that goes right back. So this here is my watering system that's hidden to look like a vine. Press a button, sprayer turns on, and that jets out water. Not exactly what I wanted. I was hoping for more of a rain system in here, but it's just too much of a small enclosure, and as you can see, most of the roof space taken up, so I was a bit limited, and that was my creative solution. The dripping vines, they worked well, but I felt that the concentration of the water was way too much in one spot. They weren't dripping evenly. It was only gravity fed, and in the end I just decided it wasn't the best option. But those pipes make really, really good vines, so that's something else that I'm probably going to play around with a bit more. The print at the background, adding some awesome depth to this enclosure, really helps with the appearance that it's a lot deeper than it actually is. Now Odin's only young, so this space is sufficient for him for a bit, but it was more about the fun of this build, to be perfectly honest. And he is still settling in, so his favourite spot is in behind the piper plant. Now that's got the climbing pole that was in the pot with it, and I just took the plant and the climbing pole out of the pot and planted it directly in here. I replaced the plant at the back with this little guy. I cannot for the life of me remember what this plant is called, but it was another cheapie from Bunnings, so I'm hoping that it does quite well. His behaviour in this enclosure, he's been very reclusive, which is to be expected. I need to do a better job of binding up all these cables and stuff, because his favourite spot, as expected, was sitting on top of that pipe. So my plan is to sort of neaten that up with zip ties and then cover that with moss so it looks a bit more natural. He goes up there in the morning, sits on there, warms up, migrates across to this little nook up here on top of this tree. There's another cable that I need to neaten up, and he sits up there till he gets too warm and then retreats back down to where he is hidden. An important thing to mention with putting young animals, or any animal really, even the big old boy, when I first put him in that big enclosure, he hid for 2 weeks straight. When you put them in a new enclosure, you need to let them settle in. You can't just put them in there, expect them to act normally, expect them to not show any stress. This is a new environment. They don't know if there is any predators. They need time to settle in and explore at their own pace. It is our job to provide secure locations and know their behaviour well enough that they feel safe where the resources they need are. So I know for a fact that he feels safe up high. So there's lots of spots for him to sit up high. Up high is where it's warmest. So he can feel safe and have access to heat. If I had this enclosure and only had a hide down the bottom, he would probably run into issues because it would be too cold. He wouldn't feel safe going up high, exposing himself in the heat, and then having to retreat back down. And that's where people run into issues. Nick Mutton said in a recent podcast interview that it is easier to just keep it simple until they get older and are established. And to a degree, I do agree with that statement, but it is possible, if you know their behavior well enough, to provide a habitat that provides safety and the resources, and then don't handle them, guys. Let them settle in. You grabbing them makes it feel like there's a predator in this environment. Leave them alone. Don't try and feed them. Don't try and handle them. Leave them be. When he's coming out and exploring on his own and sitting out in the open like his sister does in her setup, then we can start handling. He's been in here for probably a couple of weeks at this point. I haven't honestly been tracking it. I just go by his behavior. I'm about due to try and entice him with a feed, and we'll see how he goes. If he doesn't want to eat and he doesn't feel safe enough to make himself vulnerable by eating, which is something else that people don't take into account. When they have a full belly and can't move around as quickly, that means they're vulnerable. Vulnerable to predators, and their instincts are telling them, I'm not safe enough to make myself vulnerable. So keep that in mind when you're moving your animals into new enclosures, when you're going from tubs into big enclosures. Get a feed into them first. Wait a week and then put them in their new enclosure. They will have resources, so if they do go on a feed strike, it is not going to be a big deal. They will eat when they feel safe. It's as simple as that. Provide them with what they need. Provide safety and resources in the locations that they need them, and you will have success. That's it for today, guys. This is going to be, like I said at the start of the video, something that I do more of. I want to be more active on YouTube. I appreciate your guys' support, and I look forward to the next episode.